Welcome to the Diplowoman podcast, where we will be talking with and about incredible women mediators, facilitators, negotiators, ambassadors, peacemakers, peace builders, and more. I am Karma Ekmekci, and I will be your host in this journey of mainstreaming the women, peace, and security agenda into our lifestyles. With a focus on the Arab region, the Diplowoman podcast comes to you in collaboration with the SAIS Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut and is made possible by the generous support of UN Women. The Arabic subtitled video edition is available on the Diplowoman podcast YouTube channel. We're thinking out loud with Dr. Randa Slim in this fourth episode of the Diplowoman podcast. Randa is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. She's also the director of their conflict resolution program and their Track 2 Dialogues program. Randa is also a non-resident fellow at SAIS's Foreign Policy Institute. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, good to be with you, Karma, always.
Randa, I want us to have this chat today and tell our listeners what and how your journey was like into this world of peace building, this world of dialogue, how it started and how it's going.
Well, it started as a student at AUB doing a master in social psychology in the midst of the Civil War. And deciding that I would like to focus the rest of my career on conflict studies, on negotiation, on bringing citizens around negotiation tables to end conflicts. Because, growing up in the midst of a civil war, I was able to experience very closely the cost of war. And to be very honest, how silly war is in a way, especially in Lebanon. And so when I went to grad school in the States, I was starting to focus on continue to work in the field of political psychology, which we did not have at AUB. And then also did a minor in international relations. And I was one semester assigned by the school to invite speakers to our program. And I happened to invite somebody who basically, I read one of his articles at the library, at AUB in Psychology Today, Jeff Rubin, the late great Jeff Rubin. And so I said, I would like to invite him, So I invited him and he came, and really we struck a friendship from the get-go. And at the time he was directing the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. So he invited me to do a summer fellowship at the program. And then after that, he became really my mentor in terms of introducing me to people, finding jobs. And remember, I was a foreign student. So toward the latter part of my graduate school, Jeff took on the mantle of finding a job for Randa Slim because he did not want her to go back to war-torn Lebanon,
The importance of having a mentor who empowers you.
Exactly. And so one day out of the blue, I was visiting Lebanon, and then I come back, and then, Jeff calls and he says, "Oh, you have a job interview." I said, "Excuse me, Jeff, what job?" He said, "You have a job interview with the Kettering Foundation." I said, "What is that?" He said, "It's in Dayton, Ohio." I said, "Where is Dayton, Ohio?" He said, "Go and find a map. You will see where Dayton, Ohio is." And I said, "What is the job about?" He said, "Well, it is this foundation, the Kettering Foundation." So I had no idea about US philanthropy and all of this, which is a very interesting world by itself. And I don't think many people in Lebanon know about it, especially in academia.
Or the region, in fact, because our
anyway,
from across the region. And
Exactly. And so he said, and they have this 1-year fellowship, which you can do. They have this program on Track 2 diplomacy, US-Soviet And it's like one of the oldest in the country, most prestigious, known as the Dartmouth Conference, because the first meeting happened at Dartmouth College in the 60s. It was established by President Eisenhower on one side and Premier Khrushchev on the other side, in the midst of the Cold War, to create a space for citizens. It started with artists, dancers, writers, politicians, bringing people from both sides, the Soviet Union. And then over time, it has evolved into this really elaborate process of plenaries, task forces, and they had task forces on regional conflicts, all from the perspective of the US-Russia relations, US-Russia competition. Because remember, in that dialogue, it was only Russians and Americans, not people from the region. They had a task force on disarmament. They had a task force on political relations. And so he said they are interested in having somebody with with a conflict resolution background, especially process-wise, come, and they have a grant for 1 year to come and look at it, observe it, and write an evaluation of this process and look at all the documents that they have accumulated over the years. So it was like a treasure trove, diving. Wow. Here I am, diving into this treasure trove of tens of meetings, bringing the most important people over the years in the lives of Russia and the United States. And just spending the year reading these reports. And then I got to travel to, the Soviet Union, still then the Soviet Union, and attend the meetings, and it was just for me like, oh my God, what is this? But that was 1 year, it was going to end. And for me, that sealed the deal, I am not going to devote my life in academia. This is not for me, this is for me. I would like to do that. And so luckily I was offered a job, full-time job after that with the Kettering Foundation. And
to be in talks between Russians and Americans at this time, it's like being in the Disneyland of track to diplomacy. And
I know. and especially that it involves really top-notch people, it involves people who are excellent at doing that job, you see what I mean? And to watch this kind of excellence in practice, you see what I mean? It's amazing because, talk about the challenge. I mean, a lot of the challenge is also to be exposed or to be part of these settings, to observe, because initially you need to observe to take it in. You can read all you want about it, but to see it in action, time after time after time, and to be able to sit during breakout session, in the breakout,
the coffee
session,
break networking,
talk to people, sitting at lunch table, next to this former senator who eventually became vice president. You know what I mean? Talking to people and then taking it all in. And for me also as a foreigner, really understanding US politics and decision-making processes in the US, in the US government, because I had no clue what it was. And here you have on the US side, some of the top-notch people from the military, from the political, from the economic, from civil society, coming together with their counterparts in Russia. But you really, through the American delegation, get to understand how this country works, what makes it tick. And that
I have so many questions to ask you, but first, maybe you can quickly tell our listeners what track 2 diplomacy is, what track 2 dialogue is, and how is it different than track 1 or 1.5? Very quickly, because I'm sure some will be wondering, what is track 2 diplomacy?
Great, that's a very good question. So as a baseline, track 1 is government work, okay? This is what governments do when they sit down and negotiate with each other. That's track 1. So 2 friends of mine, late John MacDonald and Louise Diamond, wrote this book called Multi-Track Diplomacy. And they identified 15 tracks of diplomacy. And some, one track that I identified is businessmen, talking to each other, cementing relationship. That includes, because it all depends on how, because it really roots itself. This whole work roots itself in a expansive definition of politics. That politics is not what officials do only. Politics is the whole realm of relationship and interaction between peoples, you know.
Bottom
And
to
so
top, top to
exactly. So you have businessmen to businessmen, you know, and we all know the role that Armand Hammer, for example, played in US-Soviet relations through his business interaction with the Soviet leadership over many years. So it's journalist to journalist. It is citizen to citizen. Hella, the track 2, track 1.5, because I do both, I focus on is policy focused dialogues. So on specific
So
conflict
issue-based.
spaces, on specific issues.
Mhm.
For example, I'll give you a recent example. We have I co-convene with other colleagues at the Middle East Institute, but also at NISA, at National Defense University in the States, a US-Russia dialogue, you know, and that brings Americans and Russian experts, some of them former officials, some of them are experts with access to decision makers, to discuss Syria. But we are not discussing we don't have Syrians in the room. We have basically Americans and Russians discussing Syria through the prism of, can we collaborate? Can we cooperate together on conflict de-escalation? What are the venues? So while it is a dialogue about Syria, the focus of it is very specific. And that's very important when you do track 1.5 or track 2, is that you really have a niche, you focus. You cannot talk about everything, but rather you focus on a specific issue area. So track 1.5 is when you have current officials who are attending this dialogue in unofficial capacity, okay?
And former official, like President Carter.
You can have both, but you need to have current officials, because this is between 1 and 2, you know, and track 2 is when you have, you know, former officials, senior experts, but also it all goes into the criteria you as a designer of a track 2 process, as a convener of the process, put for yourself, you know. Mm-hmm. For example, in my case, and we have a number of track 1.5, you know, intervention that we have been doing at the Middle East Institute for some time now. One of the criterion usually I have is that you have to, every participant has to have had government experience, because this is a policy focused workshop, mm-hmm. you know, and I think academia by itself does not give you that kind of experience, right? I mean, you have been in government and you are in academia, and you move between the two, you know, worlds, if we can put it this way. They are bridges,
and I wish there were firmer bridges between
exactly And that's also the other thing, is that always the struggle, you know, and you have terminology, is the transfer, is that how you transfer from track 2 into track 1, how you take ideas from track 2 into track 1, but also how you design, for example, your agenda around questions that track 1 is struggling with, and that track 2 can provide a safe space to address and explore in a non-committal way, because these are not official negotiations. Right. And one thing I always say,
the cameras are not on you. The cameras
and the track 1.5, you know, really it's about exploration of idea, testing ideas, building relationships. But the problem remains always, and I think it's a very valid criticism, a track 2 to work cannot involve more than 20 people at best. So you are talking about, you know, a group of 20. Mm-hmm. And again, the work that I do, I like sustained track 2. I try to involve a core group of those 20 over and over and over and over. So I have a dialogue, for example, that started in 2012, and it's still going on, you know.
Serious dialogue is one that is medium to long term. I mean, this.
Yeah, exactly. And because we are addressing issues that are so intractable. I mean, mm-hmm. after all, we are not talking about, you know, a conflict that is amenable, easy solution. Because if it is the case, government have already done it, you know, it has already been solved, you know. But if you are focusing on intractable problems, which is the case in our work, that takes time, that takes sustained effort, that takes building trust, and that takes building relationships and building networks, and that needs a sustained approach.
so many young women and young men who are finishing their undergrads or their master's degrees, and then come and tell me, we really like this, peace building, dialogue space, peace and security, but we studied engineering, for instance. You're telling me you studied social psychology. What's the message? I mean, anyone can invest their time and energy and resources into this. I sometimes worry about some of the students that feel hostage to their degree. What do we tell these young women and men? Is it okay for them to break away from the shackles of the diploma that they received from university?
I have to clarify. I mean, I studied social psych in my MA, but in my doctorate, I did a minor in international relations, and I invested equal amount of time, in social psych, political psych, and international relations. So the hardcore political international relations, the whole modeling approach, the whole interstate thing. But I did it because I felt that there is a lot of things that you can learn from intergroup theories that could apply to interstate conflict and intrastate conflict. And that's, I think, the next, the intersection I was focusing on in academia. Also, it's important, is that not only the kind of degree you get, but also I think you have to be open. I mean, I know many people go into academia thinking they want to be in academia, which is fine. But also, if it doesn't turn out, there are now so many options out there that are equally fulfilling. And the whole attitude, I mean, I was forced to take on this attitude because I was a foreign student. Lebanon is in the middle of civil war. I needed to find a job, that gives me legal ways to stay in the country. And so I was open to explore anything, you know what I mean? But that's I think, in a way, the unfortunate circumstances of Lebanon at the time forced me to really go out of my comfort zone, and the training that I was prepared for and the field I was being prepared for, and explore job opportunities wherever they were, and in a way I was fortunate to fall on this kind of job opportunity. And for this, I always, even when he was alive, I always said to Jeff Rubin, and now he has passed away way too soon, unfortunately, is basically, he gave me my biggest opportunity. I mean, my career is in a way due to Jeff Rubin. It's just they have to be open to engage, to take a leap of faith, to believe in themselves, and to explore new areas of inquiries, new areas of work. Some might work from the first time, some might not work. But I mean, usually, when you graduate, you are what, in your 20s? My God, I mean, you have a whole, time ahead of you. And so take few years to explore, really take few years to do this, that, X, Y, Z of kind of work, and then see what you can put together. I mean, I always say, even when, young women approach me in the States, oh, how can we do this? Or somebody got a job and then say, what do you think I should do? I said, no matter what you do, there is the job agenda, but there is your own agenda. You always carve your own agenda in whatever work you are doing. And that's very important to be able to identify from the get-go, is what is your agenda? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? By the time you turn off the light, how do you want to be remembered? And so, so it's just what kind of difference you want to make, if you can. Although, now reaching my age, really there is not much impact, and there is not much difference. I mean, you are, like, I'm a very, 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 very small fish in a very, very, very large pond, and you keep trying. And
actually, you're not. I will disagree with you here. You're a very, very, very big fish in a small pond, because we keep struggling and talking about women participation in dialogues, in mediation, in negotiation, in conflict resolution. And we have amazing women out there, but as you know, and I know, the numbers are not reflecting that in official peace processes. And once you said that the gatekeepers against women participating in track 2 are much less than the gatekeepers that are against track 1 participation for women. Let's talk a little bit about this. And
all right, that's a very good question. And I think that's where you can look at track 2 as a training space, that can help, women in this field and women in policy, national security, move into track 1, the kind of experience they can gain. The problem is also, as I said, at least in my work, if you have not had government experience, you will not be able to qualify to come into. There are other track 2 spaces where government experience is not warranted. But in the niche that I have defined for myself, you need to have had policy experience, government experience,
right,
because you are engaging on policy issues, looking at how to deal with it from a governmental perspective and rather than from a grassroots perspective. There are others that do that work, which is very important, but this is the niche that we have carved for the work. So yes, track 2, as I said, in the work that I do, I try to involve as many women who have had government experience, but also sometimes what I do is that I try to involve women who serve as like advisors to decision makers, even though they are not, or who are senior experts and whom I can see are heading into government eventually, and so try to involve in that. But increasingly, when I started in this work, in a meeting of 20, there will be 1 or 2 women, really. And no women conveners. There were no women conveners. Today, I convene 4 track 2 dialogues, because part of the problem also with convening is that you need to have funding. So you need to convince the funders that you can get this work done. And this remains a difficulty. When I am invited to a group of conveners of track 2, the number of women remains 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 3, but it's still populated by male. It's majority male dominated, as is track 1. We are making major inroads, I think, especially in the field of national security. The recent, let's say in the United States, the appointments in the Biden administration of all these qualified women.
Many deployment in the Biden administration.
National security positions. I think this is going to really move the ball forward on this issue. It's a work in progress, and every generation moves the ball forward few meters, but it's a work in progress. And where I am today, looking at the field 20 years ago, the difference is just unbelievable in terms of, the role of women in the field of peace building, the role of women as conveners, the role of women as participants, the role of women as decision makers.
It's refreshing to hear that you feel that 20 years ago, things were not as
I have the age on me, I have the age perspective. Give me some, I earned that right.
But you've expressed also a number of times that women shouldn't be in separate groups. We have this tendency to always put women in separate groups and have the men convene separately, and then the women to feed into that masculine space. What's your theory on this? And in a region like the Arab world, where patriarchy is so deeply entrenched in our society, how do we overcome this?
Look, this is based on looking at reflecting on this recent practice by UN envoys in conflict in the region of having these separate rooms for women and for civil society. Look, I'm driven by the assumption that separate rooms are inherently unequal. Mm-hmm. The smaller room is a consultation place, but the main negotiation, the main eventually agreement or negotiation leading to the agreement are happening in this room, which is often, for example, does not have women or has very few women. Now, when you speak with the UN envoys, they say, well, it is the delegations. The delegation, we have insisted, we have asked them, we have we required them, they promised us, and then the delegation arrived and they say, oh, we have women, but they are advisors. They are not sitting at the negotiation table. And you rarely even see them, okay? And that's why they had to do this, separate room. And they look at it, and their explanation is that it is a first step. And then with time, we can bring them more into the negotiation table. Well, it's not happening because they are not baking this transition into the process itself from the get-go. And to be very honest, if UN is funding this process, you as a funder have the right to say there will be no meeting unless I see 5 women sitting on this side of the table and 5 women sitting on that side of the table.
But what usually happens is that you say, oh, the conflict is so bad, we have different
Exactly. Then I keep it in consultation. I keep it in a consultation phase. I keep it in proximity, in me shuttling down. I keep it in shuttle diplomacy until I'm assured as a convener, as a mediator, that I'm going to have 30% of women sitting at the table, not as advisors, at the table from each side. And let me say, I've had this experience let me give you this so years ago, I was working on a project funded by USAID on training negotiation skills, okay, in dealing with water conflicts, okay, and this was in an Arab country, not in Lebanon, a neighboring Arab country. And part of the training is you bring senior staff from the ministry, and so you had to meet with the minister of that ministry and then basically say, we are doing this training workshop and we need you to give us the list of people who will attend these workshops. And then so we do the first meeting, I get the list ahead of time, and it's all men. All right, it's all men. And I've been going around the ministry, there are a lot of offices where there are a lot of women, Right. And so before the next meeting comes, so I come and I say to the minister, you know what? The funder, in this case, USAID, really requires that 30% of the people in the training are women. There was no such requirement. I lied, okay? I lied. I'm saying that now.
This is going on Soundcloud and YouTube.
I know. And lo and behold, right? 30% of the participants at the next workshop were women. And they turned out to be the most effective, the most knowledgeable participants. My point is that funders have the power to enforce this practice on the conflicting parties, because especially in the Arab world, it's not going to come easy, and especially when you have basically insurgent groups, that are being brought at the table. They are, mostly they are men, so it's not going to be easy. But when the funder or the convener of the process will bake it into the process from the get-go, there will be no meeting unless there are X% of women sitting at the table from this side and X% of women at this table from the side. We are not going to have a meeting. And I think that is doable. But as you said, there is so much push and rush to make a meeting happen just because, the UN Security Council said you need to get going. The UN envoy need to show that he is. That's another issue. We don't have enough UN envoys who are women.
Absolutely.
There are extremely capable, women politicians, women who have been involved in different development projects at the international level, women politicians from different countries in the region, and they can easily be UN envoys. And look at the number of women UN envoys. So in the past, it was women working on human rights, women working on civil society, women working on women issues. Now you have women participating in committees that have to do with security sector reform. You have women getting involved in committees that do ceasefire monitoring. You know what I mean? So we are having more and more women entering all of these different arenas and these sectors that are going to be part of any peace building process. That I think is going to make it even easier to bring more women as part of the official peace building process.
The protests that you so closely followed in 2019, whether in Iraq or in Lebanon, we saw women were in the front line. Women were literally in the front line. They were carrying that banner forward. that the protests subsided. What happened there? What do you think happened there? Do you think these protests will return in these countries where the problems are still the same? In fact, maybe they're in worse situations than they were back in 2019. And how can these women move from this space that, you know, they're actors in this is on the ground? How can they move to the political space? Because at the end of the day, real change is going to come from the inside. I mean, at least that's what I think, but I would love to hear your views on this. How do you see this transition happening for women?
This is a problem that has been long-standing in the Middle East. If we go back to the Algerian independence revolution, you know, many of the women who played important roles during that revolution. And then when it came to, you know, independence, formation of the government, they were sidelined, you know, they became cultural icons, whatever, but they were sidelines from the political process. And we saw it even in Egypt after the uprising, women playing an important role during 2011. And then we go into the government formation before the coup. And during that time, again, women were sidelined, you know, who were at the forefront of the uprising. So I think that's a challenge. So let me first talk about the protest, because I've been following, because I follow Iraq and Lebanon and Syria, but I follow Iraq and Lebanon very closely. In Lebanon and in Iraq, of course, the pandemic, you know, drained a lot of the revolutionary momentum. But the second part is economic conditions in Lebanon, you know. The port blast, which forced a lot of the civil society activists, including women who were at the forefront of the fight, to basically leave the country and start looking for jobs somewhere else. In Egypt, you have a lot of these activists, including women, are now in jail, you know, and or have left the country. And so that's the problem. I mean, in Syria, look at what happened to the Syrian activists, between, you know, those who are killed, those who are forced to exile, those who are, you know, still in detention, and we don't know what happened to them. So that whole generation of activism in the Middle East, which led, you know, the uprisings and the Arab Spring in 2011, 2010, 2011. Really now, at least in this first batch of countries. Now, what's happened recently in Sudan is hopeful.
Absolutely.
What might happen in Algeria is hopeful. You know, the recent appointments of I don't know how many women ministers, including Libya. Yes. It's hopeful. So there are successes and there are failures. There are setbacks and there are wins. And we have been able to score some wins, you know, some of them have been sustainable, some have not. And we have suffered some serious setbacks. But your question is, will they come back? Look, as you said, the structural drivers of these protests are still with us, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's now in Algeria, or, you know, it's in Jordan. You know, I mean, the structural drivers are there, which is governors. Basically, in the end, what is politics? And what do people want from politics? They want politics to help them run their lives. They want politicians to be part of this relationship with them in organizing their life in an effective, efficient way that brings them life, that brings them happiness, that brings them
peace of mind,
that enables them to reach their full potential, or as much of their full potential as much, that enables them to have children, guarantee peaceful future for their children, that enable them to participate in the building of their countries, in the building of a space for their family, and by doing that, in building their country. And they want to have a say in how this is done. They elect people who can represent them, but throughout, you know, that they want to have a say. Now, in Lebanon, we have elections. You know, in other countries, they don't have elections free and fair. But still, the real drive is people want to have a say. And I don't think that's going to change. In fact, if there is anything, the world we are living in today, the social media, the knowledge accumulated by civil society, the networks built through social media across countries. I mean, look at the recent uprisings of 2019, how many lessons they have learned from the uprising of 2011, and how the 2011 uprising learned from the Green Movement in Iran in 2009. So the experiential knowledge is building. Now government are very effective at co-opting, at manipulating.
Right.
They have resources at their disposal, financial, but also they have power, military power, violent means to be able to also drain that revolutionary momentum. But it doesn't mean they can kill it. And I think I if I'm going to bet on anything, I'm going to bet on the people.
I wanted to go back to your work in dialogue and peace processes. And how many dialogues are you currently convening? I'm curious if you can share with us.
Yeah,
And
no,
what are some of the anecdotes over the years that you would like to share with us in this space? I mean, from your experience and as a woman, I mean, had there been ever an incident that happened because you were a woman and you felt like gender here came and played a role with the situation?
Let me say that 9/11 for me was like this point where I shifted to working on the Middle East. Before 9/11, and when I went to the States, I have decided, because I come from the Middle East, I'm going to avoid what every student from the Middle East does, which is work on issues of the Middle East. I said, okay, I'm fine. I need to learn something new. I need to work in different settings. Every society, every region has its own codes, I need to learn new codes. I need to really push myself and not feel familiar and comfortable, in a setting, and to enhance my learning, how to say, the learning opportunities.
Your learning curve.
Yeah, and the learning curve. Yeah. And so Kettering Foundation at the time had no program in the Middle East. So they had the US-Russia program, but they have a civil society program, which was at the time working with transitions in countries in Latin America that were taking place, democratic transition. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, democratic transition in Eastern Europe. And so we are working with a bunch of civil society organizations, trying to help them organize themselves, provide space for them to network, to learn from each other, because this transition happened at different times in Latin America versus, first, and I think it happened in Eastern Europe after. And there was a lot of potential for networking, but also learning from each other experiences, and basically develop a set of good practices for civil society organization as they navigate this transition period, which was rough. And then also we worked at some point with South Africa as well, and some other African countries. And I stayed away from the Middle East. I just stayed away. And 9/11 was somehow this, time when, after it happened, it just forced me to reflect on okay, what do I want to focus on? As an Arab American, what is my responsibility here? And what is the role where I can contribute to, healing this divide? Because I felt that this was, 9/11 was a moment in this country akin to Pearl Harbor, and
I was there. I was in the US, and I know how the situation was with all of us in Lebanese passports.
Exactly. And so I said, I need to really shift my focus now and work only on the Middle East and nothing else. And so we started then. I was at the time working with the Institute for International Sustained Dialogue and International Institute for Sustained Dialogue. And we started a dialogue, which was really one of the first of its kind, around 2003, bringing former senior US officials, former senior European officials, in conversation with leaders of Islamist parties in Arab countries, and different Arab countries. and then also that was one dialogue, and then and all of these dialogue usually have a time period, like 2-3 years, and specific agenda, and then we did, and then we had this 2003 invasion, and we decided at the institute to focus on Iraq as well as part of this de-escalation of conflicts, and we convened one of the first track 1.5. That was track 1.5, National Reconciliation Dialogue in the country. Brought parliamentarians from Iraq, brought people from the government at the time, people, tribal figures, people from the opposition, people who are like, Ba'athist, former presidential guards, who were in Jordan, Syria. And we brought them together over a series of meetings. So you want anecdotes. So during one of these meetings, and that tells you about, women. So I was mediating. So I was, in that meeting, I was the only woman. And then you had, Iraqi men, basically only Iraqi men. And then fist fights started happening in the room.
Oh dear, in the room.
Yes. Somebody said something which made somebody else angry, and they started hurling accusation at each other. And the men on my team were like looking at me, because I was sharing the session on that time. Look at me. Okay, so what are you going to do now? Yeah, what are you going to do now? And so I said, hey guys, stop, in Arabic. So because everything was being done in Arabic. So I said, I mean, isn't it shameful for you to do this kind of fist fight and to behave in this manner in front of your fellow Arab women? And whoop, it stopped.
So you used it. You used that card.
Exactly. I used that card. I was just the chair of that session. Remember, I was the chair of that session. So, however, as a chair, you have to be able to use different tactics, especially in times like this, and to deploy different modes of persuasion, if we can put it this way. And in this case, making them feel ashamed in front of a fellow Arab woman was, it worked. It made them stop, and they went back to their seat. That's one, simple anecdote.
Fantastic story.
Of something you have to do, but you encounter a lot of these settings where people are so angry, they haven't seen each other for a long time. Like in this case, these are people who are in exile versus people who were part of the new political order, and there was a lot of anger, and they wanted, and that evolved into violence. We don't see it too often, but you see it quite often. You see it enough.
Randa, with the changing nature of conflicts, so the tools we're using for solving conflicts need to also evolve, I guess. They need to change as well. Where do you see the peace building business going forward?
Look, the peace building business has really become a business in the last 20 years, and it has really carved for itself a niche in the official realm. So you have now a lot of governments that have experts in conflict resolution and peace building. But I think, it's still not enough in terms of rooting itself in the political narratives in different countries, and that's, I think, the challenge for peace builders and peace building organizations going forward, because it has implication for funding. We need to be able to engage beyond the community. We need to engage with politicians. We need to engage with, make the case for, make it part of the narrative in foreign policy, in national security, because there is still these silos, the way I see it. You have, the peace building community, you have the national security community, you have the foreign policy community, right. And they are still operating in silos. This silos of peace building has grown, expanded, has evolved its narrative, its evaluation practice, its evaluation instruments in a way that is really was not seen 20 years ago, which is very good for funding. But still, I think, and that's why, for example, I insisted on working in a think tank that does more foreign policy and that doesn't have anything to do with conflict resolution, and most think tanks do not have a program in conflict resolution. and track to dialogue. And I wanted to make sure, and that's one of the one of the rationales for me, is that we need to start to embed this work of conflict resolution track 2 in the work of foreign policy, in the work of national security. What I would like to do with the program, or what I have trying to be, to do with our program at MEI, is to really work on this exact intersection between foreign policy work and between conflict resolution and peacemaking work.
Randa, you're a role model to me personally. I can tell you this because I've been following your work, inspired by the way you've conducted all these dialogues. I mean, I know a lot of times you were in situations with insurgents, with non-state actors, and I can only imagine how interesting all this could be. Thank you for accepting to be with me today here, and thank you for being our guest on the Deployment Podcast.
Thank you, Karma, for the opportunity. I mean, you are a role model to emulate. I'm so happy to see you work, see how you are growing professionally. It's just a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.